Welcome to an exhaustive chapter-by-chapter review of Norman F. Cantor and D. Ranieri's Alexander the Great, Journey to the End of the Earth. This isn't just a biography, it's a psychological post-mortem of a man who conquered the known world before his 32nd birthday. Over the next 12 minutes, we will traverse the ancient world, from the rugged hills of Macedon to the banks of the Hydaspes, exploring the influences that forged a legend and the flaws that ultimately consumed him. Chapter 1 sets the stage, introducing Alexander not just as a king, but as a supernatural enigma. Cantor argues that his behavior was conditioned along very specific lines: heroism, courage, strength, and superstition, but also intoxication and cruelty. The authors emphasize that he wasn't just a conqueror, he was a puzzling personality whose drive to reach the literal end of the world was fueled by a deep-seated need for glory and a belief in his own divine destiny. Cantor's work focuses on the psychological landscape that allowed a single man to reshape the map of the world in just over a decade. Chapter 2 delves into the formative years in Pella. Born in 356 BCE, Alexander's youth was defined by a volatile environment of honor and shame. Cantor explores the Oedipal involvement with his mother, the Albanian princess Olympias, who instilled in him a belief in his divine birth. Simultaneously, he faced a complex, often ambiguous relationship with his father, Philip II of Macedon. Philip was a brilliant military reformer, but his shadow was long, and Alexander's early life was a struggle to prove himself worthy of his father's throne while secretly harboring a belief that he was destined for something even greater than a mere Macedonian kingship. At 13, Aristotle became his tutor, providing a training in rhetoric, science, and philosophy that would shape his governance and intellectual curiosity. But perhaps more influential was his mother's insistence on his descent from Achilles. This emulation of the Homeric hero became his core identity. Leonidas, a relative of Olympias, taught him the physical skills of war, horsemanship, combat, and endurance, while his mind was being forged by the greatest philosopher of the age. This unique education created a leader who was as comfortable discussing medicine and literature as he was leading a cavalry charge. Chapter 3 covers the sudden, violent transition of power. In 336 BCE, Philip II was assassinated at a public festival. The 20-year-old Alexander didn't blink. He moved with terrifying speed to secure his position, eliminating potential rivals and reasserting Macedonian dominance over the rebellious Greek city-states. Cantor notes that this period already displayed the mix of tactical brilliance and ruthless pragmatism that would define his entire career. He wasn't just inheriting an army, he was unleashing a force that Greece, and soon the world, was unprepared to contain. When Thebes revolted, Alexander's response was absolute. He destroyed the city and enslaved 30,000 survivors, a move that silenced any further Greek dissent. With his rear secure, he took leadership of the Corinthian League and prepared for his father's dream, the invasion of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. Cantor emphasizes that Alexander's greatness primarily stemmed from his abilities as a field commander, particularly his masterful use of the Macedonian phalanx, a wall of pikes that would prove impenetrable to the Persian forces. Chapter 4 chronicles the beginning of the Grand Design. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with 35,000 men. He was the first to leap onto the shore, throwing a spear into the Asian soil and declaring it, "Spear won land." This wasn't just a military campaign, it was a crusade. He sought to liberate the Greek cities of Asia Minor and fulfill his destiny as a world conqueror. Cantor highlights that from this moment on, Alexander was undefeated in battle, a streak of military success that has few parallels in human history. At the Granicus River, he faced his first major Persian defense. Leading the charge personally, he narrowly escaped death, his helmet shattered by a Persian axe. But the victory was decisive. It cleared the way through Asia Minor and sent a shockwave through the Persian court. Alexander began to demonstrate a pragmatic approach to governance, often choosing to leave local cultures intact while removing their political autonomy, a strategy that Cantor argues was key to maintaining his rapidly expanding empire. Chapter 5 analyzes the pivotal battles of Issus and Gaugamela. At Issus in 333 BCE, Alexander faced King Darius III for the first time. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Alexander's tactical use of the narrow terrain and his direct charge at the Persian king's position led to a complete rout. Darius fled, leaving his family, his chariot, and his honor behind. Alexander's treatment of the captured Persian royalty was a masterclass in propaganda, projecting an image of a magnanimous and noble conqueror, even as he systematically dismantled the Persian state. The subsequent 7-month siege of Tyre demonstrated his engineering brilliance and his absolute refusal to accept defeat. Moving south, he entered Egypt, where he was hailed as a liberator. In the desert oasis of Siwa, the priests of Amun confirmed what Alexander had long believed. He was the divine son of the god. This moment of apotheosis changed him. He was no longer just a king of Macedon. He was becoming a living god, a belief that would increasingly distance him from his own soldiers and generals. At Gaugamela in 331 BCE, on a plain chosen by Darius to favor his massive army, Alexander delivered the final blow. His wedge formation shattered the Persian center, and for the second time, Darius was forced into a desperate flight. The major capitals, Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, fell into his hands. Cantor notes that while Alexander sought the great outer sea, his journey was also taking him deeper into his own psychological obsession with power and divinity as he began to occupy the throne of the great king. Chapter 6 explores the complexities of ruling a diverse empire. Alexander began to bridge the gap between East and West, adopting Persian dress and the ritual of proskynesis. This wasn't just vanity, it was a pragmatic attempt to gain the loyalty of his new subjects. But to his Macedonian veterans, it was a betrayal. Cantor also examines the controversial burning of the palace at Persepolis, whether it was a calculated political statement or a moment of drunken excess. It marked the definitive end of the old Persian order and the birth of something entirely new. As he pushed further east into Central Asia, the strain on his inner circle grew. Conspiracies, real or imagined, led to the execution of his most trusted generals, including Philotas and Parmenion. In a moment of drunken rage, Alexander personally killed Clytus the Black, the man who had saved his life at the Granicus. These acts of cruelty, Cantor argues, were the byproduct of a mind increasingly isolated by its own success and the weight of an empire that seemed to have no end. Chapter 7 chronicles the invasion of India. Driven by a geographical obsession to reach the ends of the world, Alexander led his army across the Hindu Kush in 327 BCE. He wasn't just a soldier now, he was an explorer-conqueror. He encountered fierce resistance from local tribes and kingdoms that had never even heard of Greece. His journey took him through the Swat Valley and eventually to the Indus River, as he sought the elusive Great Outer Sea that he believed encircled the earth. At the Hydaspes River in 326 BCE, he faced King Porus. The Macedonians encountered war elephants for the first time, huge, terrifying beasts that wreaked havoc on their lines. Despite the monsoon rains and the formidable enemy, Alexander's tactical brilliance once again secured a victory. He was so impressed by Porus's bravery that he reinstated him as a satrap. But the battle had a devastating impact on his men's morale. They were tired of war and increasingly afraid of the even greater empires whispered to lie to the east. Chapter 8 details the breaking point. At the Hyphasis River, the army finally mutinied. They refused to cross, fearing the reports of massive armies and thousands of elephants awaiting them. Alexander, for the first time, was forced to yield. He turned south, following the Indus to the sea. The journey to the end of the earth was over, but the return would be even more grueling. Cantor describes the disastrous march through the Gedrosian desert, where heat and thirst killed more of his men than any Persian army ever could. Chapter 9 synthesizes the psychological insights. Cantor paints a picture of a man who was very human and fallible, yet who bestrode Europe and Asia like a supernatural figure. The authors explore his bisexuality, his intoxication, and the environment of honor and shame that shaped him. This final assessment avoids glorification, instead presenting a multifaceted view of a leader whose personal characteristics, his ambition, his intellectual curiosity, and his capacity for extreme cruelty profoundly influenced the trajectory of ancient history. Chapter 10 concludes in Babylon, June 323 BCE. Alexander fell ill and died after heavy drinking, leaving his empire to the strongest. Though his empire fractured, he inaugurated the Hellenistic Age, spreading Greek culture across 3 continents. This book reminds us that his journey to the end of the earth was as much a psychological exploration as a military one. For us today, his story is a case study in the isolation of absolute power and the enduring impact of a single, driven individual. A journey that changed history forever. Highly recommended.